The remote canyons of Utah do not care about your experience, your gear, or your confidence. In April 2003, Aaron Ralston learned this truth in the most brutal way imaginable. Deep inside a slot canyon so narrow that the sky was reduced to a sliver of blue hundreds of feet overhead. He was 27 years old, an experienced climber, fiercely independent, and completely alone. He had not told a single soul where he was going. When an 800-pound boulder shifted under his weight, pinning his right hand against the canyon wall, the clock started ticking on a 5-day struggle that would redefine the absolute limits of human survival. The desert has a way of swallowing people who underestimate its emptiness. Aaron was not a novice. He was a disciplined outdoorsman who had climbed some of the highest peaks in Colorado. But that morning, as he pedaled his bicycle toward the trailhead of Blue John Canyon, he was moving with the casual ease of someone who believed the wilderness was his playground. The sun was warm, the sandstone was dry, and the air carried that crisp, clean scent of high desert sage. He parked his bike, locked it to a juniper tree, and set off on foot into the labyrinth of red rock. It was supposed to be a quick, exhilarating day hike through a beautiful, winding gorge. Slot canyons are beautiful but treacherous geologic formations, carved over millions of years by flash floods that tear through the soft sandstone. They are narrow, deep, and often require tight maneuvering, squeezing through gaps and scrambling over wedged rocks known as chalkstones. To Aaron, these obstacles were part of the fun. He moved with a rhythm born of years of practice, dropping down into the cooler, darker depths of the canyon where the sunlight barely penetrated. The walls grew closer together, their smooth, undulating surfaces shaped like frozen waves. He felt a sense of complete freedom, isolated from the noise of civilization, deeply immersed in the raw beauty of the American Southwest. As afternoon approached, Aaron encountered a deep slot where a massive boulder hung, suspended between the canyon walls. This was a classic chalkstone, a rock wedged tight by time and gravity. To continue down the canyon, he needed to climb over it and drop down to the floor on the other side. He reached up, placing his hands on the boulder to test its stability. It felt solid, a permanent fixture of the canyon architecture. He swung his legs over, preparing to lower himself. In a fraction of a second, the impossible happened. The massive stone, which had likely remained undisturbed for decades, suddenly shifted. The movement was subtle but catastrophic. As the boulder slid down just a few inches, it caught Aaron's right hand and wrist, slamming them against the hard canyon wall. The impact was accompanied by a sickening, dull crunch. Aaron gasped, a wave of blinding pain radiating up his arm as the full weight of the 800-pound rock came to rest on his flesh and bone. He jerked back instinctively, but his arm would not budge. The boulder had trapped his hand in a vice-like grip against the unyielding sandstone wall. The initial shock was a blur of adrenaline and disbelief. Aaron pulled with all his strength, throwing his entire body weight backward, hoping that a desperate surge of energy would free him. The rock did not move a millimeter. He let out a ragged cry, his voice bouncing off the narrow walls and echoing up toward the sky, only to die out in the vast, empty desert above. There was no one to hear him. He was miles away from the nearest road, hidden deep within a subterranean crack in the earth. The silence that followed his screams was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. When the adrenaline began to cool, a cold reality settled into the pit of his stomach. He forced himself to take deep breaths, tried to evaluate his situation with the logic of an engineer. He assessed his supplies. In his backpack, he had a small amount of water left in his hydration bladder, a couple of burritos, some cheap multi-tool pocket knives, a climbing harness, ropes, and a small video camera. It was enough for a day hike, but completely inadequate for a prolonged siege against the desert. More importantly, he realized the fatal mistake he had made before leaving his truck. He had not left a word with family, friends, or park rangers about his route. No one was looking for him, and no one would even begin to wonder where he was for days. The first afternoon wore on into evening, and the temperature inside the slot canyon began to plummet. The desert is a place of extremes, where baking daytime heat gives way to freezing night air. Aaron was dressed only in a t-shirt and shorts. As the shadows lengthened and the last light faded from the rim of the canyon far above, a shivering fit took hold of his body. He managed to use his free left hand to pull a small headlamp from his pack and put on a thin fleece jacket, but the cold crept deep into his bones. His trapped right hand was already numb, the circulation completely cut off by the crushing force of the boulder. Throughout that first endless night, Aaron did not sleep. He spent the hours trying to come up with mechanical solutions to his problem. He rigged up an elaborate pulley system using his climbing ropes and anchors, attempting to hoist the boulder off his hand. He strained until his muscles burned and his vision went blurry, but the human body was simply no match for the immense mass of the stone. Every pull, every tug, only served to agitate the trapped flesh, sending fresh jolts of agony through his arm. When the ropes failed, he took out his multi-tool and began to chip away at the sandstone surrounding his hand, hoping to carve out enough space to slip free. The chipping was excruciatingly slow. The blade of the pocket knife was dull, and the sandstone, though softer than granite, was still incredibly dense. After hours of frantic scratching, he had succeeded only in creating a small pile of red dust and a tiny indentation in the rock. The knife blade dulled even further, and his left hand grew blistered and cramped. The futility of the effort was crushing. When the sun finally rose on the second day, casting a dim, indirect light into the canyon, Aaron looked at the minuscule progress he had made and felt a heavy weight of despair pressing down on his chest. Water quickly became his obsession. As the second day progressed, the temperature rose, and his body began to lose moisture through sweat and the sheer exertion of his constant struggles. He rationed his remaining water with meticulous care, allowing himself only a tiny sip every few hours, just enough to wet his cracked lips and swollen tongue. He knew exactly how long a human could survive without fluids in the desert heat, and the math was not in his favor. Every drop was a precious second added to his life, a brief postponement of the inevitable. To combat the crushing loneliness and the growing fear that he would die in this stone trench, Aaron took out his video camera. He flipped open the screen, aimed the lens at his own tired, dirt-streaked face, and began to speak. He stated his name, his location, and explained what had happened. He wanted to leave a record for his family, so they would eventually know his fate when his body was discovered. Talking to the camera became a lifeline, a way to maintain his sanity and connect with the world outside his rocky prison. He spoke to his parents, his sister, and his friends, expressing his love and his deep regret for his carelessness. By the third day, the physical toll was becoming severe. His trapped hand was dying, turning a ghastly shade of gray and black as necrosis set in. The odor of decaying flesh began to rise from the gap between the boulder and the wall, a constant, sickening reminder of his mortality. His mind began to wander, drifting between vivid hallucinations and stark, terrifying moments of clarity. He saw visions of his childhood, of cold mountain streams overflowing with crisp, refreshing water, and of people he loved. When he snapped back to reality, the contrast was devastating. He was still there, pinned, starving, and drying up. His water supply finally ran out on the fourth day. Desperation drove him to the absolute brink. With no other source of moisture, he was forced to collect his own urine in his empty hydration bladder, letting it cool before drinking it. It was a bitter, foul liquid, but it was the only thing keeping his organs from shutting down completely. His strength was fading rapidly. He could no longer stand for long periods, leaning his weight against the boulder and the canyon wall, his legs trembling from exhaustion. The urge to just give up, to close his eyes and let the darkness take him, grew stronger with every passing hour. On the fifth day, Aaron was convinced he would not survive another night. He was severely dehydrated, his eyes were sunken, and his skin was stretched tight over his bones. He took out his pocket knife and etched his name, birth date, and the anticipated date of his death into the sandstone wall, creating his own tombstone. He filmed what he believed would be his final video message, saying goodbye to his mother and asking for her forgiveness. He felt a strange, detached peace washing over him, a resignation to the fact that his journey was ending in this remote corner of Utah. But the human will to live is a fierce, unpredictable force. That night, as he hovered between life and death in the freezing cold, Aaron had a vision that changed everything. He saw himself in a sunlit room, a small, blonde-haired boy running across the floor toward him. He felt himself scooping the child up with his left arm, noticing with stark clarity that his right arm ended at the wrist, healed and stumped. The vision was so intense, so real, that it shook him out of his lethargy. It was a glimpse of a future that could exist, but only if he found a way out of the canyon. It was a powerful realization that he still had a choice. When the sun rose on Thursday, May 1st, the 6th day of his ordeal, Aaron looked at his trapped arm with a new perspective. He realized that the pocket knife, which was too dull to cut through the rock, could cut through skin and muscle. But the major obstacle had always been the bones. The small blade could never saw through the thick radius and ulna of his forearm. As he leaned against the boulder in frustration, he threw his body weight against his arm and felt a distinct, sickening pop. It was the sound of his bone breaking under the leverage. In that moment of intense pain, an epiphany struck him. He did not need to saw through the bone. He could use the boulder itself as a tool to break it. With a sudden surge of adrenaline and a fierce determination born of absolute desperation, Aaron deliberately leaned into the rock, twisting his arm with violent force. A sharp, loud snap echoed through the canyon as the radius bone fractured. He repositioned his body, throwing his weight in the opposite direction, and bent the arm until the ulna snapped as well. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, a blinding white flash that nearly caused him to pass out, but he forced himself to stay conscious. The bones were broken, but the hardest part was still ahead. He took out the dull multi-tool, using the small knife blade to begin cutting through the remaining flesh, muscle, and tendons of his wrist. He had to apply a makeshift tourniquet using the straps from his hydration pack to prevent himself from bleeding to death. The process was a slow, agonizing butchery, lasting over an hour. He had to use the tool's pliers to snap the tough, thick tendons of the blade could not cut. Through sheer, unimaginable mental discipline, he blocked out the agony, focusing entirely on the mechanical task of separating himself from the rock. Finally, with a final, desperate tug, Aaron tore himself free. The sudden release sent him stumbling backward onto the canyon floor. For the first time in over 120 hours, he was no longer attached to the boulder. He stood up weak, dizzy, and bleeding, looking down at the stump of his right arm. There was no time to celebrate. He was still miles deep in a remote canyon, severely dehydrated, losing blood, and completely alone. The survival battle was only half over. He had to get out of the canyon and find help before his body collapsed from shock. Aaron gathered his remaining strength, packed his gear using his left hand, and began the arduous trek out of Blue John Canyon. He had to navigate the rest of the slot, which included managing a one-handed, 60-foot rappel down a sheer cliff face to reach the canyon floor below. He wrapped the rope around his body, using his teeth and his single hand to control the descent, sliding down the rock face with agonizing slowness. When his feet hit the dirt at the bottom, he stumbled forward, driven entirely by the primal urge to survive. He walked out into the open desert, the intense midday sun beating down on his frail body. He had to hike several miles through the winding, dusty washes of the canyon system to get back toward his vehicle. Every step was a monumental effort. His vision blurred, his legs felt like lead, and his mind kept slipping toward unconsciousness. He was a walking ghost, covered in dirt and blood, moving through a vast, indifferent landscape. After walking for several miles, he spotted a family of hikers in the distance, an oasis of hope in the empty wilderness. The hikers, a vacationing family from the Netherlands, saw a horrific sight approaching them, a man missing a hand, drenched in blood, stumbling through the heat. They rushed forward to help him, giving him water and guiding him along the trail. Coincidentally, A search helicopter had just been dispatched after Aaron's workplace reported him missing, and his family had managed to narrow down his potential locations. As the hikers helped Aaron walk, the helicopter spotted them from above, sweeping down into the canyon to land nearby. When the paramedics lifted Aaron into the helicopter, his body finally gave out, and he relaxed into the medical litter. He had survived the impossible, enduring 5 days pinned by a boulder and executing a desperate, self-inflicted amputation to win his freedom. Aaron Ralston's story remains one of the most astonishing accounts of human endurance ever recorded, a stark reminder of the fragile line between life and death in the wilderness, and the incredible, unbreakable power of a human spirit when pushed to the